There are moments in life that arrive without warning. No knock on the door. No gentle voice saying, "Prepare yourself." They just happen. And before you even have time to think, before you even have time to breathe, everything you thought was solid, everything you thought was certain, shifts, and you're left standing there. Or in my case, lying there, staring at a ceiling you don't recognize, trying to remember who you are. I want to tell you something first. Before I get into any of it, I want you to understand that I am not a dramatic man. I never have been. I grew up in a household where men didn't talk about pain. You felt it. You carried it. You buried it somewhere deep in your chest. And you kept moving. That was the code. That was the unspoken rule that nobody wrote down. But everybody followed. So when I tell you what happened to me, I need you to understand the weight of those words coming from a man like me. Because I don't say them easily. I don't say them lightly. My name is Leonard. And about 14 months ago, I almost didn't make it. Let me take you back. Not to the hospital. Not yet. Let me take you back to a Tuesday morning in October. Ordinary. That's the only word for it. Ordinary. I had made my coffee the way I always do. 2 sugars. A little bit of milk. In that old blue mug my wife gave me years ago. The one with the chipped handle that I refused to throw away. Because she used to fill it for me. Before I even came downstairs. I sat at my kitchen table. The light was coming in through the window at that angle. You know the one. That low October morning light that makes everything look like it's resting. Like the whole world is still half asleep. I had my newspaper. I had my coffee. I had nothing wrong with me. Or so I thought. The chest pain started like a whisper. That's the only way I can describe it. Not a roar. Not the sharp, dramatic clutching your chest falling to the floor thing you see in the movies. It was a whisper. A tightness. A quiet, persistent pressure. Right in the center of my chest. Like someone had placed a hand there. And was pressing. Just pressing. Gently. But firmly. I set down my coffee mug. I sat very still. I told myself. Indigestion. I told myself it was the bread I had the night before. Or the stress from the week. Or the cold air coming in under the back door. I told myself a lot of things. Because that's what men like me do. We negotiate. We find a reason that isn't the real reason. We give ourselves an exit. I went about my morning. I got dressed. I went out to the car. And I sat there for about 3 minutes. With the key in my hand. And that pressure in my chest still sitting there. Quiet as a stone. And something in me said, "Leonard, don't drive." Not in words exactly. More like a feeling. A knowing. The kind that doesn't announce itself. But doesn't go away either. I called my daughter. Her name is Diane. She had just turned 34 that year. She lives about 20 minutes from me. I called her and I said, "Diane, I think something might be wrong. And you need to understand." In 57 years of living, I had never once said those words to her. Never. I had never called her worried. Never called her asking for help. Because I was the one who was supposed to help her. That was the arrangement the world handed me. And I accepted it. Without question. So when I said those words, she knew. She knew without me saying another word. I could hear it in the silence on her end of the line. That half a second of stillness. Before she said, "Dad, don't move, I'm coming." The drive to the hospital is something I only remember in pieces. Diane's hands on the steering wheel. Tight. Her knuckles. The way she kept her eyes on the road. but kept glancing at me, every few seconds, from the corner of her eye, like she was checking, like she was watching for something she didn't want to see. I remember the radio was on, some song I didn't know, and at one point, she reached over with one hand and turned it off, and the silence in that car was thick, heavy, but not uncomfortable. Not the kind of silence that needs filling. It was the kind that two people share, when they both know that words don't quite reach what they're both feeling. I remember looking out the window, watching the streets pass, thinking, very quietly, very privately, I hope this isn't it. Not in a panic, just a thought. Small, honest. I hope this isn't it. They took me in quickly. I remember a woman in blue scrubs, a nurse. She had calm eyes, the kind of eyes that have seen everything, and still manage to look at you like you're the only person in the room. She asked me questions. I answered them. She was efficient but not cold. There's a difference. She put things on my chest. Wires. Stickers. A machine started printing something. A long strip of paper with little mountains and valleys on it. My heart. Right there on paper. All those years of beating, quietly inside me. And now it was on a strip of paper, being read by strangers. I found that strangely moving. I couldn't tell you why. Diane was in the waiting room. I knew she was there. I could feel it. That's something nobody tells you about having a child. No matter how old they get, you always know where they are in a room. Even when you can't see them, there's a thread, invisible, unbreakable, and lying there in that bed, with those wires on my chest, and that machine humming beside me. That thread felt very real. The doctor came in about 40 minutes later. His name was Dr. Ockeffer. A tall man, measured, the kind of man who chooses every word carefully before he lets it leave his mouth. He looked at the strip from the machine. He looked at the numbers on the screen beside my bed. He looked at me, and then he said, very calmly, very directly, Mr. Leonard, you are critical. Critical. I turned that word over in my mind. Critical. I knew what it meant in practical terms. I had heard it said about other people before. About strangers. About someone's uncle. About someone in a news story. But hearing it said about yourself is something entirely different. The word lands differently when it has your name attached to it. It stops being a category. It starts being a reality. Critical. He explained things. Blockages. Something about my heart muscle. Something about percentages. Something about time being important. I heard him. I understood him on one level. But on another level, deeper down, some quieter part of me was just sitting very still. The way you sit still when the world gets very loud and you need a moment to simply be. I asked him one question. I said, what are my chances? He looked at me with those careful eyes, and he said, with the right intervention. Good. But we need to move. They let Diane in. She came through the door of that little room, and I saw her face change. The second she saw me. All of this in just a split second. The way her expression started to crack at the edges. The way she held it together. By some extraordinary act of will. Because that's who she is. She had my stubbornness. She had my refusal to fold. But I could see it in her eyes. That specific fear. The one that lives only in children. When they realize their parent is not invincible. She came to the side of the bed. She took my hand. Her hand was cold. She had been outside. Waiting. How long had she been sitting out there in the cold, not knowing what was happening behind those doors? The thought of that pressed harder on me than the tightness in my chest. Dr. Akefer came back in. He brought another doctor with him, a younger man. He explained the procedure they wanted to do. He explained the risks. He explained the timeline. He spoke clearly and carefully, the way good doctors do, when they're telling you something serious, and they want to make sure you are truly hearing it. When he finished, he looked at Diane and then at me. "Do you have any questions?" he asked. I thought about that. I started to speak, but before I could, Diane leaned forward slightly. She looked at Dr. Akefer, and she asked him one question. Just one. She said, "Will he be in pain?" I need you to sit with that for a moment, because I have sat with that question every day since. Not, is he going to survive? Not, what are the odds? Not, how serious is this? What does critical mean exactly? What happens if you can't fix it? She asked, "Will he be in pain?" In 57 years of living, I have been given many gifts. Many things have moved me. Music, nature, the particular way the sky looks at the end of a long day. But nothing, not one single thing, in all of those years, has ever reached inside me the way those 4 words did. Will he be in pain? Because what she was really saying, underneath those words, in the language that exists beneath language, was this: everything else I can handle. I can handle the fear. I can handle the uncertainty. I can handle not knowing what comes next. I have been sitting out there in that cold waiting room, handling it. Just, please tell me he won't hurt. Dr. Akefer looked at her with those quiet, capable eyes. And he said, "We'll make sure he's comfortable. He won't feel a thing." Diane nodded. Once, slowly. And then she looked at me. And I looked at her. And I could not speak. I, who had buried emotions for 5 decades, who had never cried in front of another person in 20 years, who had always been the steady one, the one with answers, the one with the plan. I could not find a single word. I just held her hand, and she held mine. Before I go further with this story, I want to say something to you. You, the one watching this. Maybe you're watching this late at night, when the house is quiet, and you have a minute to yourself. Maybe you stumbled on this by accident, and now you're still here, a few minutes in, because something about this is touching something in you that needed touching. I see you. Whatever you're carrying tonight, whatever it is, you're not carrying it alone. And if this story speaks to you, if something about Leonard and his daughter reaches you in a place that needed reaching, I'm asking you simply to subscribe. Not for a number, not for an algorithm, but because stories like this one, told with honesty, with real human weight, they need a home. They need people who understand why they matter. Be that person. Subscribe. And let's keep going. Let me tell you about Diane. Because to understand that moment in the hospital, you need to understand who she is. And to understand who she is, you need to understand some of where she came from. Diane was born on a March morning. I remember it like it's painted on the inside of my eyelids. The way the nurse put her in my arms. And she was so small, and so certain at the same time. Like she already knew who she was. Like she arrived with some kind of quiet authority. That made no sense for something. 6 hours old. She looked up at me. Those dark, unblinking eyes. And I felt something shift inside me. In that same irreversible way. That tectonic plates shift. Silently. Completely. Permanently. I was her father. And there was nothing on earth I would not do for her. Her mother, my wife, Beverly, passed when Diane was 19. That is a different story for a different day. But what I will say is this. When Beverly got sick, Diane was the one who came home. She was in her second year of university. She packed her things. She came home. And she stayed. She cooked. She cleaned. She sat beside Beverly's bed for hours, reading out loud from those thick novels her mother loved. She did not complain. She did not ask for recognition. She just showed up. Every single day. She showed up. And when Beverly passed, and the house went quiet in that particular way, that a house goes quiet when someone who filled it is suddenly gone, it was Diane who checked on me. Every morning. A phone call. Sometimes just 3 minutes. Sometimes longer. But every morning. Without fail. Her voice on the other end of the line. Asking how I slept. Asking what I was having for breakfast. Asking if I needed anything. Not asking if I was okay. She knew better than that. She knew I would say yes, whether it was true or not. So she never asked that. She just asked about breakfast. And somehow, that was enough. After Beverly, I threw myself into work. That is what I knew how to do. I was a site manager for a construction company. I had been doing it for 30 years. I understood materials and schedules, and weather delays and subcontractors who didn't show up on time. I understood blueprints. I understood the satisfaction of watching an empty piece of land become something people would walk into and live their lives inside. I understood all of that. Grief I did not understand. So I worked. I worked long hours. I worked weekends. I came home to a quiet house. I made myself something simple to eat. I watched the news. I went to bed. And I started again the next morning. Diane saw this. She didn't say much about it. But she saw it. And occasionally, on a Sunday, she would show up at my door. Not calling first, just showing up. With food she had made. Sometimes a film she wanted us to watch together. Sometimes nothing except herself and a willingness to sit. Those Sundays were more than I ever told her they were. They kept something alive in me that might otherwise have quietly gone dark. Over the years, Diane built a life. She went back and finished her degree. She got a job she was good at. Something in urban planning. Something about how cities grow and change. And how to make them better for the people who live in them. I never fully understood the details. But I understood that she was good at it. And that it mattered to her. She bought a small house. She had her people around her. She was whole. And watching her be whole, watching her become this solid, capable, deeply good person, was the great quiet pride of my life. I never told her that either. Men like me don't always say the thing. We carry it. We let it shine through in other ways. Fixing things around her house without being asked. Showing up with her groceries on a rough week. Remembering the small details she mentioned in passing. And acting on them later. That was my language. That's how I said what I couldn't say out loud. The months before the hospital, I hadn't been well. Not dramatically. Nothing that raised an alarm. Just a tiredness I couldn't shake. A shortness of breath when I climbed stairs. A dullness that I told myself was age. I was 57. I told myself this was just what 57 felt like. I told myself my father had been tired at 57. And his father before him. This was just the territory. I did not go to the doctor. I had not been to the doctor. In 3 years. Which is something I am not proud of. But there it is. The truth of it. I kept myself busy. I kept myself moving. And as long as I was moving, I could tell myself everything was fine. It is one of the great tricks we play on ourselves. That stillness is the enemy. That if you just keep moving, the thing chasing you can never quite catch up. The thing always catches up. I remember, about 2 months before the hospital, Diane had come for one of her Sunday visits. We had eaten together. She had made that lamb stew I've always loved, the one her mother used to make, and she had written down the recipe from memory and made it herself, which is an act of love that I understood completely, but could never have articulated properly. We were sitting afterward, that comfortable after-dinner stillness. She looked at me and said, "Dad, are you tired? Not are you okay?" She never asked that. But this time, she asked about tired. I said, "Just a long week." She nodded. She looked at her hands for a moment. And then she said, "When did you last see Dr. Mensah?" I told her I couldn't remember, which was technically the truth. She looked at me with those dark eyes, her mother's eyes, and she said, "Promise me you'll go this week, just to check in." I said I would. I did not go that week. I went to work instead. I came home tired. I told myself I'd go the following week. The following week, I did not go either. And the week after that, instead of going to the doctor, I sat at my kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in October, with a blue mug and a newspaper and a tightness in my chest that I could no longer explain away. The procedure they did on me that afternoon took about 2 hours. I was sedated. I didn't feel anything. True to his word, Dr. Akefer kept his promise to my daughter. I felt nothing. I drifted in a space between awake and not awake. And somewhere in that space, I had the strangest feeling of being very, very young. Like being a child again. That specific kind of safety that you only truly feel when you're small and someone else is responsible for keeping you whole. I had not felt that in a very long time. When I came around properly, the first thing I saw was the ceiling. White. Acoustic tile. One of those ceilings that is entirely unremarkable, and therefore the most comforting thing in the world, when you were not sure what ceiling you'd be staring at next. The second thing I saw was Diane. She was in the chair beside the bed. She had her coat still on. She was leaning forward slightly, elbows on knees, her face cupped in her hands, and she was looking at me. She had been watching me, waiting for me to open my eyes. How long had she been sitting like that? How long had she been in that chair? Watching, waiting. That coat still on. Like she hadn't quite allowed herself to settle. Like she wasn't fully ready to be comfortable. Until she saw me come back. I don't know. But she was there. And I was here. And for a long, quiet moment, neither of us said anything. She reached forward and took my hand. That cold hand again. Still cold. She'd been there a while. "Hey, Dad," she said. Her voice was low. Steady. But I could hear the edges of it. The slight roughness of someone who has been holding themselves together for several hours by pure determination. "Hey," I said. And then, because I am my father's son, because some habits go so deep they survive surgery, I said, "How are you?" She laughed. Not a big laugh. Just a small, exhausted, disbelieving sound. The laugh of someone who cannot quite believe that the man who just came out of a cardiac procedure is asking how she is. But she answered me. She said, "Better now." Dr. Ockeffer came by later that evening. He told me what they had done. He told me what they had found. He used words I won't try to reproduce here. Because medical language is not my language, and I wouldn't do it justice. But the meaning was clear. There had been significant blockages. More than one. Things that had been building quietly for years. Like pressure under the surface of something. That looks fine from the outside. He told me that the timing was. He paused here. Chose his word carefully. Fortunate. Fortunate. That word. Another one I turned over for a long time afterward. Fortunate. Meaning, if I had waited another day. Meaning, if I had convinced myself it was indigestion and gone to work. Meaning, if I had not listened to that quiet knowing in the car. And called my daughter. Fortunate. He gave me instructions. Changes I needed to make. Diet. Exercise. Medication. Follow-up appointments. Stress management. Which made me almost smile. Because I have never once, in 57 years of living, managed stress. I have outrun it. I have ignored it. I have buried it under work and routine. But I have never managed it. He seemed to understand, somehow. He said, "Take it one step at a time." I appreciated that. He shook my hand before he left. A firm handshake. The kind that says something beyond the gesture. And then he looked at Diane and said, "You take good care of him." She said, "I know." I stayed in the hospital for 3 days. 3 days of fluorescent light. And hospital meals. And the soft beeping of monitors. And nurses who moved with that particular quiet efficiency that I had come to find deeply reassuring. Diane was there every day. She came in the morning. And she stayed until they told her visiting hours were over. She brought things from home. My book. A change of clothes. The blue mug. Which made a nurse smile. When she saw it sitting on the tray table. She sat with me. She talked to me about ordinary things. Her work. A neighbor situation she found mildly infuriating. A film she'd watched the night before. Ordinary things. The kind of conversation that, on the surface, is about nothing. And underneath is entirely about this. I'm here. You're here. We're still here together. That's what we're really talking about. On the second evening, she had fallen asleep in the chair. It was past 9 o'clock. I had told her to go home. She had said she would in a little while. And then she had drifted off. Somewhere between one sentence and the next. Exhausted. That coat draped over her like a blanket. I lay there in the half-dark, listening to her breathe. And I thought about her as a baby. I thought about the way I used to stand at the doorway of her room and watch her sleep. That same feeling. That same overwhelming, wordless tenderness that I didn't have a name for then, and still don't have a name for now. Just love, in its largest, most unadorned form. On the third morning, before they discharged me, I asked Diane to come and sit with me. She sat in the chair beside the bed. I looked at her for a moment, and then I said, "I owe you an apology." She frowned. "What are you talking about?" I said, "You asked me to go to the doctor. Twice. I told you I would. I didn't. And this is what that cost." I gestured vaguely at the room. The wires. The machines. The 3 days we'd both been held in this place by my stubbornness. She was quiet for a moment. Then she shook her head slowly. "Dad." "Let me finish," I said. And she let me. I said, "I know how you've looked after me. I know what it cost you when your mother passed. I know you came home and put yourself last. without being asked, and without complaint. And I know you've been worried about me. For a long time. Maybe longer than I've been willing to see. And I want you to know that I see it now. I see all of it. And I am sorry that it took this for me to say it out loud. She didn't say anything for a long moment. She looked at her hands. Then she looked at me. Her eyes were full. But she wasn't crying. She was absorbing it. The way you absorb something you've needed to hear for a long time. And part of you isn't quite sure what to do with it now that it's arrived. She said, I just needed you to still be here. Simple. Quietly devastating. I just needed you to still be here. Not I needed an apology. Not I needed you to be different. Just here. Present. Breathing. That's all she had ever asked. And somehow, in all my years of working and moving and carrying and doing, I had not fully understood that simply being here was the most important thing I could offer. They discharged me on a Friday afternoon. The air outside was sharp and cold. October doing what October does. Diane had brought the car around. She walked beside me through the hospital corridor, matching my pace, which was slower than usual. My body reminding me, gently but firmly, that things had changed. We walked past that waiting room, the one she had sat in for hours that first day. Those gray chairs, a television mounted high on the wall, a coffee machine in the corner. I looked at it as we passed, and I thought about her sitting there, alone, waiting, not knowing. That particular quality of not knowing. That is the loneliest feeling in the world. And I thought, she sat there. And the one question that rose to the surface, out of all the fear, out of all the uncertainty, was not about herself. Was not about what she would do if I didn't make it. It was about me. Will he be in pain? I have thought about those 4 words almost every day since. I've turned them over in the early mornings, when the house is quiet, and I'm sitting at the kitchen table, with my coffee. Different mug now. The blue one with the chipped handle is still there. But I have a new mug too. One Diane got me. It says nothing on it. Just a good solid mug. I use both. I think about what it means. To be loved like that. To be loved by someone whose first instinct, in the middle of their own fear, is to worry about your comfort, not your survival. Your comfort, because survival was in the hands of people more capable than her. She could not control that, but she could ask. She could make sure that if they were going to do something to me, I would not hurt. That she could do. That she could stand at the edge of her own helplessness and do. I am not the same man I was before that Tuesday morning in October. I want to be honest about that. Not in a dramatic way. Not in the way people sometimes talk about near-death experiences. As if they came back with all the answers. As if something unlocked and the world became clear and bright and simple. It wasn't like that. It was slower. Quieter. More like a gradual reorientation. Like the slow adjustment of a compass. Finding north again. I retired from the construction site 6 months later. Not because I had to. Because I chose to. Because I sat down one morning and I did what I had never done before. I asked myself what I actually wanted my days to look like. Not what was expected. Not what I was needed for. What I wanted. And the answer surprised me. I wanted mornings without alarm clocks. I wanted to read the books I had been putting off for 20 years. I wanted to learn to cook properly. Not just to feed myself, but to cook the way Beverly used to cook. With time and attention and the willingness to make something good. I wanted Sundays with Diane. That didn't feel like stolen time, but were simply there, built in, part of the week. Not a visit, a habit. I go to the doctor now. Every 6 months. I see Dr. Mensah, the one Diane had asked me to see that Sunday, the one I had promised to see, and then quietly broken that promise twice over. I sit in his office, and I answer his questions honestly, and I do not negotiate with my symptoms anymore. I do not tell myself stories about indigestion. I do not run from stillness. I have learned, in the way that things are sometimes only learned the hard way, that stillness is not the enemy. Stillness is where you hear the things you need to hear. Diane still calls me every morning. That has not changed. If anything, it has deepened. The calls are longer now. I am better at staying in them, better at not rushing off the phone, because I have something to do. I have learned to sit with the conversation, to let it be what it is, because I understand now that those calls are not just phone calls. They are her way of checking the thread, the invisible one, making sure it's still there, making sure I'm still there. And so I answer, every morning, and I stay on the line, and I tell her what I am having for breakfast, because she always asks, and I answer because I know that underneath the question about breakfast is a different question entirely, and the answer to that one is always, yes, still here, still here. There is one more thing I want to tell you, something that happened about 3 months after I came home from the hospital. Diane and I were having one of our Sundays. She had cooked again. Something simple. We were sitting after the meal. That familiar, comfortable silence. And I looked at her and I said, I never asked you. That day in the hospital, when Dr. Akafor asked if you had questions. Why that one? Why did you ask about pain? She considered it for a moment. She held her mug in both hands. She looked at the table. And then she said, quietly, almost to herself, because I already knew you were going to be okay. I think I knew it the second you called me. Something in your voice. You were scared, but you were present. You were there. And I thought, if Dad is scared but still present, then the fight is still in him. Then he's going to make it. And so I didn't need to ask about survival. I just needed to know that while they did what they had to do, you wouldn't be alone with something that hurt. I didn't know what to say. I still don't, really. I just nodded. The way you nod. When words would make the moment smaller, rather than larger. The way you nod. When you understand that the thing you've just been told is not something to respond to, but something to carry. I carry it. Every day. I carry those 4 words. Will he be in pain? And I carry her answer to my question. I already knew you were going to be okay. And I carry the particular understanding that comes with being 57 years old, and almost not making it, and being pulled back, gently, by the hand of someone who asked only one thing of the universe. Not your life, just your comfort. And somehow, in asking for the smaller thing, received the larger one too. I don't know what I believe about that. Whether it means something, whether there is some design in it, whether asking for the gentle thing is sometimes the most powerful act of faith there is. I don't know, but I think about it in the early mornings, with my coffee, both mugs on the counter, October light coming through the window, and me, still here, still breathing, still here. I said at the beginning that I am not a dramatic man, and I meant that. So let me end simply. The things that keep us here are rarely the things we expect. Not the big gestures. Not the grand declarations. More often, it's a phone call made before getting into a car. It's a mug that belonged to someone you loved. It's a daughter in a waiting room who doesn't ask the universe to change the outcome, just to be kind about the process. Pay attention to the small things. Let the people who love you be there for you. And when someone asks you to go to the doctor, go to the doctor. I'm Leonard, and I am still here.